so much for being on the line tonight. For those of you who I haven't had a chance to meet, my name is Brad Bradford, and I'm the Toronto City Councillor here in Beaches, East York. I want to be really brief right now because tonight is about listening to your feedback and hearing from all of you attending. I heard last week that the presentation was long and we really wanted to save time for questions. So we've given that feedback to staff. As you heard from Bruce there, we're going to try and move through the slides quickly and get to the Q&A and open up the floor to folks. But I do want to start by acknowledging a couple things. First and foremost, just how important this meeting is. This hasn't been an easy conversation. These are never easy conversations, but it's been particularly challenging here. And I've heard a range of views and concerns. At our first meeting last Monday, when I went out to the doors 2 weekends ago in the neighborhood and had conversations with folks on the street. Certainly in all of the email correspondence, phone calls, text messages, social media messages, I've heard about the concerns. But I am a firm believer that nothing worth doing comes easily. And I know that East York and the East York mentality is about coming together. It's a community that cares. And neighbors here are not afraid of rolling up their sleeves, coming together to make things work. Second, I do want to acknowledge, for those of you who weren't with us last week, I said off the top, the rollout of this process hasn't been great. It should have been different. Last week was actually an emergency meeting, so this would have been the first meeting that we were coming together here March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, of course, and we threw the meeting together last week because we just didn't want to wait. We should have had more information out much earlier. We should have had more dialogue, and as a result, I think that there's been a lot of questions that have been unanswered and misinformation out there, and we're here to get clarity. We're here for fact finding, and we're here to work together. So, I want to own that and acknowledge it and just let you know we're here to do better. The last 3 weeks have been really tough on our residents. They've been really tough on neighbors and East York as a whole. There's lots of lessons learned for the city, but we're here to get things back on track. And again, those phone calls, when you've given me your time to talk to me on the phone, the text, the emails, that helps us go forward. I've heard questions about family units. I've heard questions about community safety, questions about parking, and also how we can come together to welcome the new residents when they come to the neighborhood. I know we're going to step up and meet that moment and rise to that occasion. You should know that I am listening and that this is the start of the process. In the coming months, we are going to work together to address those questions and concerns. So I've had texts since the last meeting and calls. What are the updates? Well, the truth of the matter is it's 1 week later. So this is not all hammered out and finalized. That's why we're still meeting. That's why we're at the start of this dialogue process, and that's how we're going to work together. We're all working to make up for lost ground. And that feedback that you shared with me last week, we were able to move that into a motion at council you're going to hear about that really sets a course of action for us on the way forward. There's a couple things that we're going to be doing in terms of launching our community liaison committee, which we're launching for the project to set up some issue-specific groups. So 4 key areas: community safety. We're going to be out on the site. We will be inviting Mayor John Tory to join us for that, a walkabout. We're going to talk about parking. We're going to have a working group to address concerns around interaction with the school, and also for many of our sports stakeholders. Stan Waddell is such a tremendous facility, so many different sports stakeholders. We want to work with them as well. So really, to wrap, I want to give the biggest thanks for everyone who's on the line. We had more than nearly 400 people show up last Monday, and whether you are offering full-hearted support for this project, as many of you are, or you're here with questions and concerns that need to be addressed, we're here to get the facts and information out to you and starting to integrate the community's vision into this proposal. Lastly, I do want to thank and acknowledge Mayor John Tory for joining us tonight. He's joining a very big and long meeting on this file 2 weeks in a row now. And for someone as busy as the Mayor of Toronto, to my mind, that really shows just how much he cares about this project, cares about this community. And last week he was here listening. taking notes, and he was actually answering and diving into the chat there as well. So it's no secret that this has been challenging in terms of a project and delivery, but the mayor's been on the phone with me daily, listening to the feedback, offering suggestions. And, I think if we pull back and look at housing challenges across the city, the homelessness crisis, affordability crisis for our parents, for our kids, for folks we know, nobody is working harder in Toronto to deliver affordable housing than this mayor, and that's not an easy task. So he's been through this on a number of sites now. I know he'll be joining us in the neighborhood when we get out there safely as a community and to help move this process forward. And, so my thanks and gratitude to him. And with that, maybe I will turn it over to you for a few comments there, Mr. Mayor. Thanks very much.
Brad, thank you very much. And I just want the people to know who are with us tonight. And again, I see there's almost 150 people signed up already on the line. And I think that's a good sign for local democracy. That Brad, I would have no choice but to be on the phone. I wouldn't mind being on the phone every day with Brad Bradford, but I would have no choice because he calls me every day about this and texts me and emails me and just about finds any measure of communication that he can. And so he's completely engaged. I just want you to know that. And he has invited me to come out and walk the streets with him, which I said I'd be happy to do, and we'll do that at the appropriate time. And look, you learn every time with this process of any of these kinds of things, whether it's a large development or a supportive housing development or just about anything, even when it's something that would be seen as entirely welcomed and enthusiastically requested by the community, a recreational facility. There's various opinions that come up about the how and the when and the where and the why and all of that sort of thing. And our job is to try to make the best of that, knowing one thing, which is we have a crisis on our hands in the city of Toronto. And, I get a lot of email in my office about the encampments that are in existence across the city and the number of people who are sleeping on the streets. And these are people who are experiencing homeless. And when you meet them, as I have many times, and you talk to them, you realize, as I've said previously, perhaps even last week, I'm not going to repeat everything I said, they are us. They are people that, a divorce in the family, about with depression, about with alcoholism, the loss of a job, cause them to experience homelessness. And sometimes it goes into a downward spiral from there. And we have decided as a city, I think quite rightfully, and with the endorsement, I believe, of the vast majority of you, it just wasn't working to add 2,000 shelter, beds every year and just keep saying add 2,000 more, add 2,000 more. It doesn't work from any perspective. It doesn't help those people to ground themselves and to get back into permanent housing. It's very costly, much more so than a more sensible option like supportive housing. It's not humane. I mean, it doesn't provide people with the support they need to get them out of the hole that they found themselves in, usually through no fault of their own. And so we're confronting now the challenge of not just adding shelter beds, which actually is quite easy aside from the money. And the COVID forced us to think differently, but we decided to think differently before that and to do this better and cheaper in the sense that it actually costs less to provide people with proper supports in a permanent home than it does to put them in a shelter. So I will just say to you, since the last meeting, and I realize there's some who were at the last meeting, I can see some of the names popping up already in the chat, and some who were not, that we have already begun. Well, Brad was quite correct in saying, and so was Bruce, in saying that, of course, we haven't answered every question that came up in a meeting that was held a week ago. We have begun already to look at some of the concerns that were raised. And I think you'll hear from Bruce tonight that we're not going to adopt the usual government approach, which says, fine, we'll get a consultant, we'll get the report, we'll make the decision, and then we'll move on. What's actually going to happen in this instance, and you'll hear about this from Bruce when it comes to the traffic, for example, is yes, we have some outside expert help, but they're going to bring the various options that they have to address the traffic concerns you raised and discuss those with you. And we will then be guided by both the advice of the consultant and by the reaction to the different options presented by the consultant that you have as people who live in this area. And similarly with safety, you've heard Brad make reference to the fact that instead of just saying, well, we'll get an expert report from the police or whoever, we're going to walk through the neighborhood together and schedule permitting, and I'm going to try and make it absolutely the case that I can be there. I will walk on that walk with you and with Brad so that we can see the different things that might be of concern to people. So I just want you to know, and this won't be the last meeting, there's another one that's already scheduled, and there'll be more held after that as we go into the spring to realistically and carefully and thoroughly examine both the comments you've made and the output that comes from the people we ask for advice when these kinds of problems are raised with us. I believe in my heart, and I said this last week and I'll say it again, I believe in my heart that it is not only possible, but it is proven to me. It is proven to me that small developments of this kind that always start off with a degree of angst because people are anxious about change, have, without exception, turned out to be successful across the city. They've turned out to be successful because we work together to produce two results in tandem. One is to maintain the quality and the character and the safety and the stability of neighborhoods, which is part of our job. And the other is at the same time to integrate into that neighborhood some permanent housing for people who, with the right supports, can get back on their feet and can be people who are, contributing citizens. But they're citizens and residents of the city nonetheless. We will work in the community to make that happen, and it takes effort on both parts, on the part of the government and all the people that work with us, and on the part of the community itself to give us the input, which you started to do last week. And I appreciated even the stuff that was very critical. I certainly appreciated it very much because it was very helpful. And so I will just say to you that I hope that this forum tonight provides you again with more information, more answers. It gives us more questions that we have to take away and act on your behalf. And we will be back, and I will be part of that too, because I see it while I'm responsible for these developments right across the city and go to many of these meetings in many different parts of the city. I'm responsible for the whole city as mayor, and I believe that we can make this one a success and all the others a success and achieve that goal of keeping neighborhoods stable and safe and all the things that you want, and at the same time helping people that we need help from. So I want to just thank Brad for his absolutely stand-up representation of you, including the things that people may not want to hear, that we need to hear in terms of process and other things. And I want to thank Bruce for a very capable job he and a whole team of people are doing, including all those on our city staff who are listening and they're acting. And I think you'll see that even from a week ago, there's action being taken in direct response to things you said. That will be the case coming out of tonight as well. So Bruce, back to you, and thank you so much for the time tonight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I know the modular housing is an important part of the city's housing plan, and the fact that you're here 2 weeks in a row obviously underscores how important this is to the process, but also to finding suitable housing. Tonight we have assembled a panel that will be providing information. We've also got several slides that we're going to put up. These slides will be made available online once this session is over. In terms of the agenda, we've shortened the panel. There's about 20 minutes of presentations, and then we're going to go straight to questions. And I'll explain a little bit later on how you can submit your questions. I think we have about 270 members of the public. It goes up and down a little bit. So there's a lot of interest in tonight's meeting, and we're going to try and get to as many people as possible. When we get to questions, we're not pre-screening the calls or questions, but we do ask people to keep their comments concise, constructive, and considerate of other views. The shorter the question or comment, of course, the more people get to speak. Many people have strong views about this proposal, pro and con, and we just ask people to be considerate and not to use language that'll further victimize the people we're trying to support through this initiative, or to use hurtful or hateful language. Our panel for this evening includes several key individuals from the City of Toronto. Abigail Bond. Abby Bond is the Executive Director of the City's Housing Secretariat, and she's leading the City's plan to move forward with 40,000 affordable housing units. 18,000 of those are supportive housing units. 1,000 of those are modular housing units. So Abby is going to be first off on our panel. Michael Whelan is the Senior Vice President of Development at Create.to, which is the city's real estate development arm. And Create.to is working with the city's corporate real estate team to find sites across the city. So he'll be able to speak to the specifics of this site selection process. Sharon Hill is a professional planner with the City Planning Department in the Strategic Planning Unit, and she'll speak to some of the planning issues and how the entire city planning team is coming together to review this proposal and urban design issues and so on. We do have other staff from city planning available tonight if we need to call on them, but Sharon is going to make the main presentation. We do have other staff, and we have consultants that will be available for questions and answers. So if we need to call on them, we can. Again, we've shortened the panel for tonight so that we can get to your questions as quickly as possible. So let's get started with an overview of the citywide plan for modular housing. And let me call on Abby Bond, the Executive Director of the city's Housing Secretariat. Abby, over to you.
Thanks, Bruce, and good evening to everyone. I'm pleased to be here tonight to share some information with you and also answer questions. So as Bruce mentioned, we have a big target of 40,000 new affordable homes. This is very much a part of our Housing TO 2020 to 2030 action plan, which was approved by Council in December of 2019. And it's really a real focus of this plan is about how we relieve the pressure on the city shelter system. A big part of that new housing supply is designed to be supportive housing. And we've been really trying to accelerate the work that we've been doing on that over the last year, mainly in response to the pandemic, but also because there were pre-existing issues in our system that needed addressing around homelessness. So phase one of our modular housing efforts was 100 new homes at 2 sites, which opened just before and just after Christmas at 11 Macy Avenue and 321 Dovercourt Road. Phase 2, which we're talking to you about tonight, includes 150 modular homes to be built in 2021. And these modular homes will provide permanent rental housing for those people in our city experiencing homelessness. Next slide, please. So a few points I want to make about modular housing and what it is. These are studio apartments. They are rental housing. So all of the future residents who live here will be renters like any other renters in your community. So they'll be subject to the Residential Tenancies Act with the same rights and responsibilities that you would see in other buildings. The tenants will pay no more than 30% of their income towards the cost of their housing, which means that it's very affordable to those people who are in receipt of benefits like OW and ODSP. And then the city works with all of the other levels of government to make sure that there are rental subsidies to ensure that these homes stay affordable to the residents, but also the buildings are well maintained and are a good addition to the community. Another important feature is that each of the sites will be managed by an experienced non-profit housing provider who will be providing on-site support services and also shared amenities. So this will be supportive housing with 24/7 staffing. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the need for supportive housing. Every night we have close to 8,000 people in the city who are experiencing homelessness. And really as a result of the physical distancing that we had to bring into our shelter system as a result of COVID-19, there's been a much greater strain placed on the shelter system. So really, and as Mayor Tory said, the main focus is to provide permanent, affordable rental housing with support services on site to enable people to either move out of the shelter system or out from an encampment or living outside. Some information about who is homeless in our city. So on the city's website, you can see the last street needs assessment. So in 2018, we found that single adults were the most likely people in our city to be chronically homeless. And indeed, 89% of those people who are homeless in the city, chronically homeless, are actually single adults. There's also some information about gender. We see the majority of homeless people are male, with about 41% female. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the support services and who we're aiming to have manage this building. So the city's intention is to issue a request for proposals to select a non-profit operator for the modular housing on this site. We're really looking for organizations who have experience working in local communities, especially this one, who have experience managing other buildings which are affordable and also supportive, a really strong track record in tenant engagement and communications with both the tenants and also the broader community, and as well have experience working with a range of tenants, including marginalized and vulnerable populations. And in addition, some of the key services that will be operated on site, and I'm sure we'll get questions about this later, the kinds of services that will be offered really are about helping people to maintain their home, so housing stability, and also preventing eviction and preventing the loss of housing and people circling in and out of homelessness. There will be a focus on providing mental health and wellness support, as well as helping people directly access primary care systems in order to make sure that they get the health support that they need. There will also be harm reduction and substance use support, as well as help with daily living activities, for example, helping with shopping or a food program, and also importantly, making sure that people have the connections they need to other community supports and like volunteer or employment opportunities, learning opportunities, access to a library, access to food, as I'd mentioned, and making sure that they're getting the income assistance that they need. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide, thanks. And I'm going to hand over to Mike Whelan now. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's certainly a pleasure to be here with you tonight and talk about our modular housing project. In terms of site selection, we've looked at approximately 50 sites across the entire city for this project, and there's several key criteria that we look at in terms of selecting a site. And these include local demand. What's the demand for affordable housing in the area? We look at the ownership. Is it owned by the city or its agencies or one of its corporations? We typically look for a site that has an area of approximately 25,000 to 30,000 square feet. We look for flat, unencumbered sites that are paved or grassed and rectangular in shape. We take a look at the development potential. So what can we actually build on the site? And we undertake test fits with our consultants. In terms of environmental conditions, we undertake on-site due diligence to determine if a site is environmentally clean and doesn't need a record of site condition due to the requested timelines for building the housing. Proximity to public transit, is it relatively close to existing or planned public transit? And we look for sites that are in close proximity to existing health and community centers, or services rather. In terms of official plans, designation and zoning considerations, the site should be located in neighborhoods, apartment neighborhoods, or mixed use areas. And the site selection process, including our physical due diligence undertaken, takes approximately 40 to 60 days for any one site. So all of these criteria lead to our determination to be able to design and build the housing within the requested timelines, which is approximately 9 months from start to finish. It's very fast. Next slide, please. So what exactly is modular housing? In this case, modular housing is a prefabricated building that's completely built within a temperature-controlled factory, including all finishes, furniture, and appliances. Once the modules are completed, they're transported to site. They're set on foundations by crane, and then they're joined together like building blocks to make one integrated building. It's permanent housing that's high quality, it's building code compliant, it's environmentally sustainable, and it's compatible with its surrounding neighborhoods. Modular housing is 30 to 50% faster than conventional construction, and so less time is spent constructing on site as well, and resulting in less disruption to the community. Next slide, please. And I'll turn it over to Sharon Hill at this point in time. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Mike, and good evening, everyone. I'm just going to take a moment just to walk you through the planning process for the review and approval of the proposal. And I think first off, just as a foundational comment, it's worth noting that the city's official plan has policies with respect to housing, and one of the key policy objectives, of course, is to see affordable housing across all neighborhoods in the city, and for that housing to be of different building types and different types of tenures, and to provide people that opportunity across the city to have access to affordable housing. Now, you heard a little bit earlier about the need for affordable housing in the community, in the city, across the city, and so Council has asked us to consider and make recommendations on ways that we can actually deliver this housing faster, how that approvals process can move more quickly. So we've identified for Council and suggested that they request that the province put in place a minister's zoning order in order to address the zoning regulations that would be required for the proposal. So that's a process that would move more quickly than through the city's zoning bylaw review process. The second type of approval that's required for this type of proposal is a site plan approval. And what we've done in order to expedite the site plan approval process is to assemble a team in-house. Site plan approval requires technical review from a number of divisions across the city. And so we've assembled a team of people from across the divisions to actually work together on reviewing and providing feedback and working closely with the consultant team on the site plan application. Next slide, please. So yeah, just again to that comment about the site plan. So we're looking at things like landscaping, site servicing, waste management, amenity space areas, things of that nature. And the site plan application for the Trenton proposal is expected to be submitted to the city at the end of March. And that's when sort of sort of things will kick in terms of people coalescing around the application to review. I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. I just want to go back to Abby. Abby, can you speak to the specifics of this particular Trenton Avenue application? And also a couple of issues were raised by Councillor Bradford and went to City Council last week. And I'm just wondering if you could touch base quickly on those two items.
Yes, I can. So the proposal for this site is for 64 studio apartments, about 350 square foot in size for each, within a 3-story building format. Each home will be self-contained, so it has its own kitchen and washroom, as well as there being indoor and outdoor amenity spaces. There will be a laundry facility on site, a communal kitchen, and also dining room as well as staff offices in the building. And we're aiming to get this site occupied by the end of 2021. And then I think next slide has the council motion. So on March 10th, City Council approved some additional motions and directions for staff that we report back with a detailed analysis of on-street parking options within the immediate area. And that there's a public posting of the parking study conducted for the site, including any relevant background information. In addition, we were also asked to set up a community liaison committee, or include in the terms of reference for the community liaison committee a role for the members of the committee to provide advice on non-profit housing providers and make with connections to the local area and community support services to make this successful. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. So let me just take a minute to walk people through the process where we are right now and a couple of other things that we've got planned for the next couple of weeks. You can see from this slide, we're kind of still at the start of the process. We had a community meeting last Monday, March 8th. We have another one scheduled for May the 3rd. This will go to council again. So it went to City Council last week in principle, and a number of things came out of it, which you just heard. And then it's expected to go back to City Council again June 8th. While this is going on, the city planners are actually digesting this, and they're circulating this proposal to various other departments. So it doesn't show here on this slide, but there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes concurrent with the community engagement side. The site plan application will be submitted, and then that really gets into the specifics. A site plan application is very, very specific. It lays out how the building will fit into the site, and a lot of very specific things that the staff have to go through to make sure that it fits. And they're going to be digesting that. Once, or when and if council finally approves this, then activity occurs on several levels. Off-site construction begins. So the actual prefabrication of the modular units happens concurrently with work that's being done for site preparation and construction on site. This is how they can tighten up the construction timelines. At the same time, again, it's not on this slide, but at the same time, concurrent with that, the city's going out looking for their service providers. So these will be an organization or organizations that will actually be the landlord for the property and also provide the on-site services. So that will happen concurrent with that construction and prefabrication process, all with a view to having this property occupied by this year. So I just wanted to point that process out. And then if we go to the next slide, We've added a couple of other things. We heard loud and clear last week that there are many concerns and issues that we need to dive into in more detail. That also came out of the council resolution. So the Community Liaison Committee will be established. My understanding is we're going to be asking people to submit their interest. The Community Liaison Committee is basically a place for residents and local organizations to provide feedback. It's like a focal point for feedback and ongoing discussions. It happens before, during, and after construction, before and during occupancy. So we're able to kind of maintain that dialogue. And once the service providers are on board, we can also have conversations with the service providers. So that'll be set up in April. So if you're interested in volunteering to be on the Community Liaison Committee, the CLC, that's what we call it, just send an email to communityliaison@lura.ca. We'll have this slide later on so that you can see how to do that. And then in the subject line, just put CLC. That way it goes into the folks who can invite you to be part of that. And there's a process, but it's very simple to be part of the committee. We've done this many times. It's a really healthy place for people to have ongoing discussions. The second thing is because of the number of issues that came out around parking, we're setting up a parking subgroup. And based on community feedback and the council motion, BA Consulting is reviewing their options. They're going back, reviewing their options, reviewing the available opportunities, and they're going to present those to a smaller group for feedback. So we can discuss it tonight, but they really want a smaller group, and we would like a smaller group that can kind of look at the recommendations. Those recommendations, of course, will be made public. So if you want to volunteer for the parking subgroup, please email that same email, communityliaison@lura.ca. We'll post that in a few minutes. And in the subject line, you can just put parking if that's something that's really important to you. I think it was mentioned a little earlier tonight, we're planning a safety walkabout that I'm going to be organizing with the councillor's office and 55 Division Police. We've had some preliminary conversations with that. So if neighborhood safety issues, we don't anticipate that this will be an issue. We don't anticipate safety issues, but we will look at the subject site and adjacent areas like the park and the playground, that kind of thing. There may be suggestions we have about the site plan or landscaping or lighting, that kind of thing that will help. So we've done this for other communities, and I think it's really important that we do this before the May 3rd community meeting coming up. Now, I also understand that a meeting has been set up with the Parkside parents and caregivers for next week and with school officials. Invitations have gone out from the school, so that's really for parents and caregivers at the school. That is happening. Last, and I just want to mention this has come up from the counselor's office, we're going to be setting up an online meeting with some of the sports league organizers and the conveners, people who are active in organizing sports in the park and the arena, so that we can get their feedback and let them know what's happening. So we're really we're really making an effort to get additional feedback on very specific things. And if you can volunteer, that would be really great. We would like to get that feedback before the May 3rd public meeting and before this goes back to City Council in June. That's some of the additional process. So now to questions. If you're just joining us, my name is Bruce Davis and I'm your host and facilitator this evening. I'm a consultant hired by the City of Toronto to assist with community engagement around the proposal for modular housing on Cedarvale Avenue, and I'm facilitating this session. We're going to open the floor to questions. So if you'd like to get in the queue, and I see there are quite a few people in the queue already, there's a raised hand icon. If you're on your computer, you just look for the raised hand icon, you press that, and then you'll go into the queue. And then we'll start at the top and work our way down. If you're on your phone, you have to press *3. Once you press *3, you'll go into the queue. And then when it comes time to open your mic, we'll explain how to do that. We are not pre-screening the calls or questions. And I just ask you to pose your question to the panel, and then we'll try and get the right person, the right expert to answer. In terms of questions to the councillor, we've asked the councillor to kind of summarize at the end of the evening, so this doesn't just become a dialogue between an individual and the councillor. So we've asked Councillor Bradford to hold his response or his feedback until the end of the evening, and then he can summarize what he's heard. We always like to remind people to keep their comments concise, constructive, and considerate. And we know that people have strong views about this proposal, pro and con. And we just ask we ask everyone to be considerate and not to use language that'll further victimize people we're trying to support, or to use hurtful or hateful language. We also have questions that have been submitted in writing through the Q&A box, and I'm going to grab a few of those, but let's start with people who've already put their hand up. And so some people have put the tick box or the question box. If you could just use the raised hand symbol, that would probably be the easiest way to do this. So first in the queue, we have Cicely. Cicely, I'm going to open your mic. Go ahead with your question.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. So I just want to say to start off with that I actually am supportive of a development. I'm not entirely sure I'm supportive of this development. I do think it's too many units for the community to deal with, and I think 64 units is possibly too much for even a nonprofit to properly deal with. But anyway, that's not my question right now. My question is actually much more technical. Given that this is an MZO approach, has there been a hydrological survey done? There is a stream, from what I understand, that is under that parking lot. We live just to the south and downhill from that property, and I would assume that stream. So what if this goes in? Let me just finish my question, please. If this goes in as planned, 64 units, what mitigation will be done in advance to address any water concerns? And if there are water issues that come up, is the city going to take responsibility for any problems with basement flooding in the future? And will we get that in writing? Thank you.
Okay, so let's open this up to our panel. Engineering studies, this particular case was hydrological studies. Would this either be CreateTO or Sharon? Can you speak to the issue of applicants making, submitting all the appropriate reports? Who would like to start with that question first?
I'll start first, Bruce. Thank you. Yeah, there are a number of technical supporting studies that come with a site plan application, and one of them would be a servicing and stormwater study. My colleague, Jeremy Clute, is on the line, and I'm not sure, Jeremy, if you're able to confirm what technical studies might have been submitted in support of this.
Yeah, I can jump in and just to provide some reference, the 175 Cummer site, we did require a hydro-G report or hydrogeological report as a submission requirement for the site plan application. And then that report is under review by our colleagues in engineering construction services. So again, we'll go through our regular due diligence as we would on any site plan application to determine what impacts this development would have on underground groundwater.
Could I just mention, Jeremy Clute is with the city manager's office with the Concept to Keys department. So we very much appreciate you jumping in on this. We've got all the experts here on the panel. Thank you for that. Would anyone else like to jump in on this question of the required studies? No, okay. So let's go to our next question. I have Imogen. I hope that I'm pronouncing that correctly. Imogen, I'm going to open your mic and you are next up to speak. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry if my family's in the background. I was wondering what's going to be done to protect the homeless people moving in from any local, like, community members who are already living there who might have kind of ill will towards them. Like, what are we going to do to welcome them into the community, since they will be part of the community? I just want to know that they'll be safe from anyone who is judgmental or mean to them.
Well, Imogen, thank you very much for your question. I can go to a panel member on this, and I can also touch a little bit about what's happened with other sites. Abby, the question really is about what, if anything, we can do to make sure there's a healthy relationship between the tenants and the future operators and members of the community. I I can't anticipate somebody being that hostile, but do you want to speak to that issue in your experience?
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. And can you hear me? Because I'm just having some technical issues. But so yeah, I think the key thing is that we're going about a robust process to pick the right nonprofit operator for this site. And there are, over 10,000 units of supportive housing already in the city. So there's lots of organizations who have experience of opening and managing supportive housing. And we've heard from them repeatedly, the key part of that success is building healthy and safe community inside the building, but also those connections outside the building as well, be they with community groups, churches, other organizations who want to build connections and have strong dialogue with the residents at the new building. So that's and I think we stated that we're ideally looking for a nonprofit organization who already has some connection to the community. That would be great if they're either already providing services or they're already operating housing in the area.
Great, thank you very much for that, Abby. And I also know, having worked on some of these other sites, that it's interesting, but once these initiatives are up and running, the local community is always, it really comes around. And I'm really amazed at how well the local communities come out to support these once they're operating. Thank you very much for that. Next, I have a couple of written questions I'm going to go to, if that's okay. Let's just look at the, let's just see. I have one here from John. Oh, sorry, I had one. Sorry, some of the questions were about how do we submit written questions. You can always write to the community liaison at lura.ca. Here is one about why is this being planned across the street from a school? And one of the issues is many neighborhoods, of course, across the city are great residential neighborhoods, and they also have great schools. We have a school meeting set up for next week. Abby, would you like to just touch on the issue of concern that this gentleman has about this? May be a great initiative, but it's across the street from a school, and that's going, and a daycare, and that's going way too far. Can you just speak briefly to that issue?
Yeah, well, there's really two parts to that. One is really around the issue about community safety, and we've heard from the community that they do have concerns, not just about the proximity of the school, but to other, recreational services. There is a lot of research and evidence about supportive housing, both in terms of its success for residents and also for communities as well, and cities like ours that are struggling to deal with homelessness. We've put some information on our website for a couple of evaluations and research that really point to the fact that housing first, affordable housing with support services on site is really a very effective way for supporting people to live successfully in community. With no anticipated issues around loss in property value or extra crime in the area or extra community safety, because those are often issues that the community raise. So I think we're happy to share that information. It is on our website. So we're not anticipating any issues regarding community safety. And we're going, in setting up a community liaison committee, it really ensures that we have that strong dialogue with community on an ongoing basis, and that we can hear directly from people about any issues or concerns that may arise, and that we, along with the nonprofit operator, will be able to respond effectively. The one other point I wanted to make as well, and I think Mike talked about this in terms of the choice of sites as well, why, I think the question was, why choose this site adjacent to the school? There are many aspects that go into choosing a site, and as Mike said, we evaluated a large number of sites across the city and are still evaluating sites, actually, because we have further phases of the delivery of supported housing to come. So we're still in that process. And there are many factors that he mentioned, both in terms of environmental considerations, services, but ultimately it's also about us being able to develop a site within a short period of time to be able to respond to this emergency crisis.
Great, thank you very much for that, Abby. I have a question online from Cindy, and Cindy has asked, has there been any further developments on considering this modular housing for families as opposed to singles, which would be a better match for this family-oriented neighborhood and all the surrounding amenities? We've heard this obviously from other folks, and we heard it last week, and so on. So the choice, or how and why this choice was made for singles as opposed to families. Abby, do you want to just jump in on that one?
I will briefly, but I wonder also if Laurel Rain wants to comment as well from SSHA, because I believe Laurel's on the call tonight too. So, I mean, I guess very briefly, I did touch on this, that we see almost 90% of the people experiencing homelessness in our city are single adults or youth. But I'll let Laurel speak a bit more to that.
Laurel, thank you. Maybe you could just introduce yourself. I know you were with Shelter Support and Housing Administration, which obviously is playing a key role in terms of tenant selection and how and why individual tenants are going to come here. Can you just speak to your, and just introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, my name's Laurel Rain. I'm Director of Service Planning with Shelter Support and Housing. So we, administer the emergency shelter system, and we'll be working to identify tenants to move into these new homes once they're built. And as Abby mentioned, we have considerable demand for these types of homes to be able to move people out of emergency shelter and into permanent housing with supports they need. And we really see from the data in our shelter system, and this is available online in a new dashboard that we've created that really shows some of the client demographics in our shelter system right now and the types of people who are experiencing homelessness. We see from that data that the vast majority of people currently experiencing homelessness in our shelter system are single adults. So as Abby said, we have around close to 7,800 people experiencing homelessness, and 90% of those 84% of those are single individuals within the chronic homeless population. So those who experience homelessness for longer periods of time, that number is even higher, and 90% of that group is single individuals. So that really is why these units are so important to address that need within our shelter system.
Great, thank you very much for that, Laurel. Let's go to Brent. In terms of opening up the lines, I have Brent, and then I have John, and then I have Derek. So let's go to Brent. You have a question. I'm going to open up your mic. Go ahead, Brent.
Thank you. My first question is, we're just wondering why the design wasn't a little closer to the one on Macy Ave. We drove by, and it seems to fit the community a little better. The brown on the outside of the unit here, the proposed appearance anyways, seems a little too industrial for the area. And I was just wondering if that can be changed to better fit the community. And once that's addressed, I just have a quick one about the family units actually as well.
I see Bruce may have temporarily lost Bruce there. I wonder if we could, maybe Sharon, you could speak to some of that. Thanks.
I'll take that. Thanks, Abby. Yeah, thanks very much for your feedback. And one of the, the things we're looking for through this consultation is thoughts and comments of this nature. So in terms of looking at the design and materiality, we can certainly take those comments back. And we have both the consultant architect on the call tonight, as well as our own urban design staff as well.
Sure. Yeah, because the location at Victoria Park and the Danforth, appearance-wise, is very appealing. It looks gorgeous. And just a very quick one on the family units. My general opinion, and I think a lot of the feedback from the community would be, it would just make a little more sense to us. We're not saying for all of the units to be family units, but it would make a lot more sense if some of the units were family units, just with the benefits that I see that families could experience. There just is not, in my opinion, a whole lot to offer for singles. If you're maybe closer to a subway line or closer to other amenities. I know we saw the graph last week of where those amenities are in the 2 kilometer radius, but most of the amenities that are actually close are just perfect for families. And thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing Bruce. I don't know, Liz, are you able to kind of take over in terms of the access to the questions? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm right here. I just think I need host capabilities, which Bruce has. But I'm going to try to go to John to see if I can go off mute. Just one moment. Yeah, I can't get folks off mute because I'm not the host. So Mercedes, can you pass me the host role? I think you've been made host. Mercedes, I'm hoping, great. Okay, so I've got a question here from Annalise. So Annalise, thanks for your question. It's a written one. I'm very supportive of this initiative. Question, how will the service provider be selected? And once selected, how will they be evaluated to ensure the housing is meeting the needs of the residents and the broader community? So Abby, I'm wondering if you can take that one.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. We're going to be issuing a request for proposals, which is a competitive process where we invite nonprofit housing providers with the right track record to kind of apply to the city with their proposals for managing this building. So we're looking for their track record in terms of managing other similar buildings, not just affordable housing, but also supportive housing, the kind of health of the organization in terms of financial and also governance, their experience of supporting residents, tenants like the ones we're proposing to move into this building, and the connections they have with community and the support services and network that they build in other systems, in other places to support community in buildings like this. So that's all very important to us, and that will be the results of that competitive process. We will pick the best nonprofit for this site, and then there will be a lease. So there will be a contractual relationship through a lease with the city to the nonprofit, and through that we will put into that lease like performance characteristics, the way that expectations that we have about the way that they will upkeep the building, etc. And then we will monitor that in a very close way to making sure that they adhere to all of our expectations around that. But if there are suggestions, from the community that you want to give to us about some of those important kind of performance that you're looking for, then that would also be very welcome as well. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Abby. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Liz McCarty with Laura, working with the CLO office, and I see Bruce is back. So Bruce, I'm just going to pass the host back to you. Give me one moment.
You're on mute though, Bruce.
I apologize for that. I just had a technical glitch, and these things happen. Liz, thank you very much for picking that up. So we have a lot of folks who want to ask questions. Let's go to who have I got? Oh, who have I got next on the list? Next, I have Nick. I apologize. The numbers got turned around a little bit. Let's go to Nick. You've got your hand up, so go ahead and ask your question, Nick.
Hi there. Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, great. Thanks. Thanks for taking my question. So I'll just preface my question saying that I've lived in Toronto my whole life, and I know the city quite well, and I honestly cannot think of a worse location for a housing complex like this. However, just going back a few months over the summer, as we are all probably well aware, that 3 temporary shelters were set up in the Eglinton and Mount Pleasant area. This was an unmitigated disaster that I would say could only be described as a complete failure by our municipal government. There was a lack of planning, consultation with the community, and operational ineptitude that resulted in a significant increase in crime, including hard drug use with needles littering sidewalks, violent assaults, robberies, burglaries, and prostitution, all within close proximity to 2 large high schools and an elementary school. The similarities with this are uncanny. So What I'd like to know is how will this site be any different from these failed projects at Eglinton and Mount Pleasant? And more importantly, what has been learned from those projects? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Nick. So let's go, we'll start with Abby. Do you want to take a first shot at that question?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for the question. So there are some key differences between the proposal here and a shelter in terms of these are studio apartments with renters living in them. So each of the apartments will have its own front door. The resident will have privacy and agency over their own space. They will also have a kitchen and a bathroom in each of those units. It's quite a different setup to a shelter where there is a lot more solely communal, only communal spaces where people kind of sleep in a kind of congregate setting and eat together, etc. So there is quite a different setup. All of the people here will pay rent and they will sign a tenancy agreement. So there are clear rules and obligations on them as tenants to be good neighbours to the other neighbours in the building and also to the community at large. The other kind of key difference is the support services that will exist on site for residents. And the kinds of support include, things like, case planning, supporting residents to go to learning opportunities, to get a library card, to open a bank account, all of the things, to find a doctor, an optician, a dentist, all of the things which will help them make improvements in their own health and well-being. And as I've said, this approach, this housing first approach, affordable housing with these wraparound support services delivered by experienced nonprofits have been shown to be really effective in terms of improvements that people are able to make in their own health, positive interactions that they make with the community at large, and really starting to put their life on a different trajectory. It really is a life-saving, a life-changing experience to be offered a supportive housing home. And I would say that the first two buildings, so the modular housing buildings at Dovercourt and Macy, are good examples of how that process, the setting up of these new buildings in those communities is going well, and we're seeing good integration. We're not seeing community safety issues like the ones that you highlighted for both of those buildings. So that's very much the model that we're looking to implement here.
Thank you very much for that, Abby. Let's go. I have Jeff and then I have Gordon. Jeff, go ahead. You have a question or a comment? Jeff, go ahead.
Yes. I just want to say, first of all, I'll keep my comments short, but I'm strongly in support of this initiative. My wife and I live on Woodbine within walking distance of the housing site and would love to have this in our community. I think there are a lot of reasonable questions that people have that need to be answered. Good for them. But my question is, as a member of the community who's in support of this initiative, how do we make sure that our voice is being heard here as well? We want to leave most of the time here for people who have questions, but if we're mainly just in support, how do we voice that support so that people know that we're in support of this?
Thank you for that. You can obviously write to the community liaison at lura.ca. Obviously, you can let your councillor know how you feel. We're also looking for volunteers to join the community liaison committee. That committee will have people on it who are supportive, but also many people who have concerns and questions. So those are a couple of different ways for you to be involved. And obviously, you can talk to other folks in the community about what's going on, and we very much appreciate your feedback. Next up, we have a question from Gordon, and then I have Riley. Gordon, Riley, and then Aaron. So let's go ahead to Gordon. Gordon, go ahead.
Hi there. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So I just posted here in the forum. I have to apologize. I posted a bunch of questions here. Every time I thought I could press the enter button and then ask my question, but it resulted in a butchering of something. But I just wanted to state that according to the City of Toronto overnight data, in terms of families that are checking into shelters, shelter capacity in the City of Toronto is 6,072 people is kind of the occupancy level, and consistently families represent about 987 to 988 of those people that are in shelters. And I've been checking that every single day since we had our first meeting. So it's a fairly, at least in the short period of time, the 2 weeks, it's been a fairly consistent number. My understanding is that the funds that are being allocated through this rapid housing initiative, those are, I believe, 20%, and maybe I'm wrong on this, so I'm asking for clarification. 20% of the rooms that are made available are supposed to be given preference to females, women, girls, as well as boys. So I'm assuming families. And given the fact that the first 3 projects that you're contemplating doing, or I shouldn't say 3, the first 4 are all right now currently contemplated as being single individual occupancy or studios, would this not be the perfect setting and perfect opportunity to start to introduce a family solution and actually check that box of providing spaces for women with children, occupancy? Because my understanding is that that was part of the criteria for accessing the funding through the CMHC Rapid Housing Initiative.
Okay, so let's take that part first. Just, Abby, maybe we can just clarify whether or not there are strings attached to this funding that relate specifically to housing families, and then maybe we can go to Laurel Rain at Shelter Support and Housing just to answer the question about the demand, the need out there. So, Abby, can you speak to that finance question first?
Yes, well, because of the large number of single kind of adults, not families that we're finding in our shelter system and out on the street, our real focus in terms of the modular housing phase 2 and also the rapid housing initiative was on studio apartments. Now there are populations that are targeted for a focus in those funding initiatives, and it does include women, it does include Indigenous households, LGBTQ, 2S, it includes Black households, people with disabilities, people experiencing homelessness and mental health. So there are some focuses within that, and that's very much a part of when we choose our nonprofit provider. We're looking, sometimes they will have a special experience with certain groups, and so they're through that, the choice of nonprofits, we're able to sometimes tailor the services to a particular household. But as part of our eligibility and our investment plan that was submitted to CMHC, we did not include any family units in that application. So we did focus on single adults because of the overriding demand for that type of housing and in terms of our shelter system and people living outside. But maybe I'll let Laurel speak to the rest of that question.
Laurel, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for the question and for the clarification on the data piece. It's a really good question. And you're right that the nightly shelter occupancy is posted on our website. The data that I was referring to and that Abby referenced in the presentation is actually from a different set of data about system flow. So I can share a link to that that's on our website as well. It's newer data, and it actually shows the number of people who've accessed shelter over time. So it's not just a nightly snapshot, which is what the occupancy and the capacity shows. So it's a better understanding of who's using our system, and more importantly, for how long. So who's entering and exiting the system, and how long are people staying, which is really important if we want to, target our solutions and our investments towards having the greatest impact in reducing homelessness. And that's where this housing that's really aimed at single individuals will be helpful, because what we find is that families also tend to stay for shorter periods of time in our shelter system. So definitely that is a need for affordable housing for families, but we find that they tend to stay for a shorter period of time and are able to exit homelessness more quickly, whereas we have a larger group of single individuals who tend to spend longer periods of time in homelessness and maybe need a little bit of extra support in order to find housing and stabilize in that housing, which is what this project is really designed to do.
Bruce, can I just add a couple of other pieces as well, because I don't want to imply that this you know, the city doesn't think that family housing, affordable housing is important. And we do have a number of other programs where family housing is very much a part of that. So we have our Open Door program where we support nonprofits to build on their own land. And we also have our Housing Now sites, which is where we're building on elsewhere on city land for, you know, affordable housing for the average person, the average household in Toronto who can no longer or is really struggling to afford both rental housing and home ownership in the city. And both of those programs have a strong element to them of family housing, and we include substantial numbers of family housing in those types of projects. And again, information about that is also on our website. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Nick, and then I'm going to go to John. I apologize. I think, John, I lost you in the queue, the question queue, when I got disconnected, but we're going to go find you again. I see you a little farther down, but let's go to Nick, and then we're going to go to John, and then I'm going to come back up to the top. So, Nick, I'm going to open your mic. Go ahead. You have a question. Nick? Okay, let's go down to John. I see, here we are. Just 1 second. John. Okay, John, I'm going to open up your mic. Go ahead.
Hey, Bruce. Thank you for correcting that and bumping me back up.
Yep, thanks.
Firstly, thank you to the panel for your consideration again. Before I start, I'd actually like to make a very small request. It's actually my third attempt at public consultation to have a very direct question asked. Previously, after posing my question, I was muted and unfortunately unable to notify the respondent that they had not addressed my inquiry. I've also been unable to get a response to that inquiry via email. I'm hoping that out of mutual respect for my time and the panel's time, that I will not be muted today and have the opportunity to confirm that the question was addressed. Is that sound fair to you, Bruce?
Obviously, go ahead. So the predicament we run into is we try and get through as many as possible, but go ahead and ask your question, and we will obviously do the best we can to answer it.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm actually going to start with a comment, and then I'll move on to my question. Like many participants, I'm actually fairly concerned about the impact to the community for this modular housing proposal. Per the public documentation and what was also said tonight, we've been repeatedly told that we do not anticipate any increased public safety issues in the neighborhood as a result of this modular housing building. I've repeatedly asked to better understand how this initiative came to that conclusion, and I'm very grateful that at our last community meeting, the Executive Director of Toronto's Housing Secretariat, Abigail Bond, was able to reference the supporting material for this conclusion. Specifically, she referenced the Wesley Institute report. I am deeply concerned that this report is being used as a basis for evidence for the prior claims. I encourage all participants to read this document. Perhaps it could be shared again tonight. For context, this report was written by the DREAM Team, which is a self-reported group of men and women living with mental illness who are current residents of the supportive housing that they were actively evaluating. The approach for this study involved interviewing other tenants of the shelter, staff supporting the shelter, and a very small number of nearby neighbors. The bias from the authors in the interview panel should have significant enough reason to dismiss the legitimacy of this report. In addition to that, the authors have deeply conflicting observations that don't align with their conclusions, such as things like crack cocaine was already readily available in the neighborhood. Increases in crime were specific to crimes like theft over $5,000 or weapons offenses. Thankfully, we did observe a decrease in thefts under $5,000. In the same Wesley Institute report, they actually reference a 2002 study that asserts that crimes rates demonstrably increase in the vicinity of larger facilities with 53 or more tenants. As a professional in research and statistics, it is appalling to me that this report is the basis for the claim that there is no expected impact. The poor methodology and conflicting results and references are not the basis for sound decision-making. Deflecting legitimate concerns with references to this report should be unacceptable to everyone in this meeting. It shows poor judgment and in my mind diminishes the credibility of the stakeholders for this project. My continued goal is to have a meaningful conversation about the risks associated with this proposal and how they can be weighed against the humanitarian benefits of supporting our homeless community. Let me attempt to address that again with my question. This question is directed to Councillor Bradford. Like many other city projects, I believe we should embrace evidence-based decision-making to ensure that their safety is a critical component of this project. I do not believe that this is accomplished by a walkabout. I'd like to know what metrics and tripwires will be used to evaluate the ongoing impact to the well-being of our community And what protocols will be put in place should we exceed undesired outcomes? Thank you.
Okay, so the question part is
there was
what...
a lot there, and I'm happy to respond, and then staff can speak to it as well in terms of the validity of the report and the comparisons. Thank you for the long introduction and the brief question. I would say that metrics are very important. I think that this is something that we are, going to want to monitor for the success of the residents, for the success of the community, for everybody who's involved. I think it's a good question to ask staff here, and they'll have an opportunity to respond on what those RFPs look like, those contracts that we have in place with the not-for-profit service provider, with the operator, with the folks who are in the building providing the services to make sure that the residents are successful. But I think, like all concerns about safety in the community, we have to have standards that are met, and policing and safety isn't something that can only be based on numbers. I talk to the folks at Division 55 often, and I think they would agree that sometimes numbers are not the only thing that we need to look at. So we can use data and evidence to target our response. I think that's helpful, but that doesn't represent the entirety of any particular picture or story. So, that's my feedback on those comments. I think it's important. I think it's something that we should, through the Community Liaison Committee, work into our process with respect to the operators on the site and the services that are provided. I think that's important. And maybe I'll leave it there and turn it over to staff to kind of address your criticisms of the report.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Bradford. And so the information that we provided are examples of some of the evidence. We can provide others as well. I think there's no one report that gives a complete picture. We also referenced a report from BC, which actually did do specific studies of modular supportive housing and the communities around them. So that is something that is specific to this type of housing and this type of approach. There is also significant information on the Alliance to End Homelessness's website. They have a piece on their website that says evidence that's about supportive housing working. And so there's a number of reports there included there. And I think fundamentally the evidence really around Housing First working in Canada really came from the At Home Chez Soi project, which was run by the Mental Health Commission of Canada, which basically followed around 2,000 participants over a period of 2 years and really was groundbreaking in its methodology and its approach, and really is the foundation of the supportive housing model, the Housing First model that many of these buildings are based on. And I'd be happy to follow up with the individual and maybe answer some more of their questions or concerns regarding the Wellesley Institute report. But it wasn't supposed to be just one report that we based our approach on. There really is a body of evidence there from a variety of different report researchers across the country. So we can put some more information on the website for those people who are interested. But I think so that is really the basis for staff's recommendation around the need and desirability of supportive housing. And that was really endorsed through our Housing TO action plan. So it's in that document, which really gave us the direction to go and deliver on this supportive housing model. But research is one part of this. I think the other part is the commitment, and we've talked about it here, about setting up a community liaison committee and ensuring that that dialogue and that responses to issues of concern that communities raise happens on a real and timely basis. So that is very much a part of our approach and a desire to continue to talk to community about those concerns.
John, I'm going to open up your mic just to make sure that you're able to comment on that.
Yes, thank you so much for doing that for me, Bruce. I really appreciate it. Abigail, I would encourage and greatly welcome you to link your references. They're not available on the website right now. And, I'm simply quoting what you referenced last week when we talked about this, but please do share that and we can talk directly. And to Councillor Bradford, thank you for acknowledging the need for metrics. I agree that it should be both, qualitative and quantitative. I'm excited to hear that you are willing to undertake a quantitative measurement process and put in place protocols should we see ill will there. So thank you, and I look forward to more details on that.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So I'm going to go back up to the top of the list. There's a name here, or there's a caller who I don't have a name. It's a phone that I have. So I'm just going to read out the first part of your phone number. And if you could open up your mic. To open up your mic, you have to hit *3, I believe it is, or is it *6? Here I am. It's 416-425. So I don't have your name, but if the first 3 digits are 416-425, I'm going to open up your mic.
Yes,
there you go.
Me.
Go ahead, speak.
Oh, thank you so much. This is Mrs. Petkovic, by the way. I can tell you my name. And I live on 263 Oak Park Avenue, which is very close by. And I have received this pamphlet just 3 days. It's very disturbing to me. And I am absolutely opposing this kind of project. I am older person, over 65, and I see people like this. It says over here about them, it says they're unstable mentally. They have all kinds of challenges, health issues. They can harm themselves. It says harm reduction, relapse prevention, counseling, and support. These people are not for our community. Send them elsewhere where they cannot harm people, not only themselves, but us. And one more thing, like I am very upset with Mr. Tory that he is approving that kind of thing in a nice, quiet, docile community right across the street from the kindergarten, from school, and from retirement home. This is a shame that he is approving that kind of thing, that I will not ever be able to walk around safe. And comment on the person that has been saying Imogen, I believe at the beginning of will they be safe? I think I will not be safe from them. They are not, go ahead, but they are not for our community. This is
right. Can we just pause? I just want to pause for a second. People are entitled to their views, but you're creating the impression you may have misunderstood, because essentially that brochure is laying out the supports that are being provided to people who may or may not need them, but also people across our communities do need support. So I just want to be very clear. You're creating an impression that I don't think is accurate, and that's probably not helpful for the dialogue. We just had a little conversation like literally 2 minutes ago about safety concerns and how to address those. And you're creating, I guess, an impression that the neighborhood will not be safe. We do not want you to be left with that impression at all. These are our neighbors. These are people who are in our city that we are trying to find permanent housing for, so they'll be safe and successful. I just don't want you to create the impression or to be left with the impression that you will not be safe or that this isn't healthy for the community. I know we've just had that conversation. I apologize for jumping in on that, but I don't want people to be left with the wrong impression. Mayor Tory, I see you just put on your camera. You looked like you wanted to say something.
Well, just to say to this woman and also the others on the call tonight, these people, there's no evidence whatsoever that these people represent a risk to safety. They are people who, as I pointed out before in discussing who is resident in supportive housing, they're people, I've met many of them, as has probably Councillor Bradford. And when you talk to them and say, how did you end up in need of this kind of support from us? They say, well, I started to suffer from depression, or I developed a problem with alcohol dependency, or I lost my family, or I lost my job. And they ended up in a kind of a spiral that can happen to anybody. I mean, these are people, they are us, as I say all the time. And the notion that the woman mistakenly put forward based on whatever brochure that these people are dangerous and that they represent some threat to others is just not the case. And every time we put the supportive housing in any place in the city, and it's all over the city, all over the city, and in many of the sort of quote unquote quiet neighborhoods that the woman made reference to. Before long, the people have become integrated into the neighborhood. The neighbors have befriended and kind of in a way adopted them. And it's just the Toronto way of doing things. There's just no evidence whatsoever for those who claim that there are these kinds of safety or other issues related to this kind of supportive housing, which has permanent homes for people in apartments, not a shelter. It's a permanent home with supports to make sure that some of the issues they've been through, they get some help with. So I just wanted to clarify that, because to say otherwise is just not true of this kind of development. It's just not true.
Thank you very much, Mayor Tory. So I'm going to go down the list, but I had a question here from Mara Lee that was written in the question box. I'm supportive, but I live in the neighborhood. Are the tenants able to stay long-term and settle in, or will they have limits to their rental terms? It would be good to see new tenants that can stay and build a life in the neighborhood rather than a revolving door. And I think this speaks to the whole issue of, is this a shelter or is this permanent housing? Abby, let's go to you on this.
Yes, thanks. It's an interesting question, and I think the question does speak to the importance of permanent housing. Our intention here is for people to choose through the assessment and process to identify people who are suitable for this housing. People will be offered the choice to live here, so they will choose this place as their home, and they will be able to make their permanent home here. So they'll be signing a tenancy agreement like other renters, which give them security of tenure, as long as they, adhere to all of the kind of rights and responsibilities that are included in that tenancy agreement. And so the success of the model is very much about that permanent place where people can stabilize, they can put roots down, they can make connections, they can rebuild their lives, and really focus on improving their health and well-being. And that's one of the main reasons for the success of this model, is that the new residents will care very much about whether their home is a safe place to live, whether their building is safe, and how they fit in with the community as well. So we see that there are, as I think we've said, over time they will build connections and relationships with the community and become very much an important part of the community. People want to give back, they want to find ways to volunteer and be, many people want to be participants in that community as well. So this type of housing and that permanent, affordable and supportive housing does give people the opportunity to do that.
Thank you for that, Abby. I'm just going to ask my technical colleague, can you put up the slide that shows how people can write in if they have something? We have about half an hour to go. We have quite a few people on the line. We want to get to as many as possible. That's the one there. So you can always write in. Yep, that's the slide. Community liaison at lura.ca. And there's a phone number there. You can leave a message and someone will call back. And if we get lots of different questions, typically we compile them and we compile the answers and then we post those collectively. You can also go to the website toronto.ca/modular housing, and we have a form that you can fill out there with your comments so that can go into the consultants who are compiling their report. But tonight we mentioned a couple of other things. One is if you want to be on the Community Liaison Committee, you've heard that several times, you can write to Community Liaison at lura.ca, and in the subject line just put Community Liaison or CLC. And that way you'll be sent a link and you can sign up for that. Someone, I think John online, asked what authority does the CLC have? It's really an advisory discussion group. It's a feedback group, so it does not have any legal authority over the operations. It's basically to keep the neighborhood plugged in and informed. The second thing is if you're interested in community safety, and we've heard a little bit about that tonight, and you want to participate in our safety walkabout that we're going to do in the next couple of weeks, you can write to that community liaison, and in the subject line just put community safety and we'll get you plugged in. I'm going to organize that, so I'll invite you. And also if you're interested in parking, because we did hear that earlier on in the questions about parking, you can write in and just say parking. And again, we're going to set up a subcommittee of folks who are just more concerned about parking so that we can have the consultant meet with you. Again, that has to happen before the 3rd of May. So I just wanted to make sure you got that. And if you're not able to get your question in tonight, please make sure that you send it in to the address that you've got here. Next up, we've got Riley, and then I'm going to go to Aaron. Riley, go ahead with your question or comment. Riley, go ahead.
Well, my question was sort of regarding what was the last written question that was discussed about the sort of permanence of the housing. But I do feel like that was answered mostly. I guess the only other thing I have is if you have a sort of average timeline. But instead, I'm going to ask sort of the secondary question I had, which was concerning the use of the MZO, which is, or the MZO, that's being used. As someone who lives near the foundry that's being, that was, been grave concern over the provincial oversight and the use of that. I see that this is a city that the city has, or city council has approved this usage, where in other ways when it's might have been, over when they're sorry. My concern is just that there's a bit too much use of this provincial measure, and I was wondering if you guys could speak to the fact that in some cases the city likes when the province can step in and rezone, and in other cases they don't approve, and how do you sort of deal with this double-edged sword?
Okay, thank you for that. The MZO, Minister's Zoning Order, for the benefit of folks who are not planning aficionados, is a tool, a provincial tool under statute that the province can use to rezone land instead of going through other processes. But I think we should draw on our planning expertise on the panel. Sharon Hill, maybe you can just jump into this and answer the question from a planner's point of view. I know the planning department, city planning, recommended this as a potential tool. Do you just want to touch on how and why in this particular case it's something that you've recommended? And of course, council agreed in principle last week, but it did come out of your planning report.
For sure. I think the
And
most
can you put on your, there you go, you've got your video on. Thank you.
Are we good? Yes, sorry. Thanks, Bruce. Thank you for the question. I think the most important thing to point out in this instance is that this would be a circumstance where this city council is making the decision to request that the province assist and put in place a minister's zoning order. So city council will be considering and balancing what they consider to be the important need to deliver affordable housing and create more affordable housing in the city through a more expedient process. And one of the things that city planning has recommended that council consider is the use of that minister's zoning order. So I think the important thing to remember here is that city council is really sort of leading that process and leading that request to the province.
One other thing I want to ask you about, Sharon, this doesn't mean that the planning studies are not being done or that the planning department's not going through this process. Notwithstanding that it's a minister's zoning order being recommended, all of the studies that are required, the site plan process, all of that is still being done, correct? And the circulation to various departments.
Absolutely, Bruce. And I think, in terms of the kind of things that we consider when we're going through that process of considering appropriate zoning regulations, is we undertake community consultation. City planning writes a fulsome report to council so that they can understand the larger planning context within which they're evaluating the proposal, and city council is making a decision. So all of those steps would still be happening in this process. Just that final step would be that city council could request that the minister puts in place a zoning order so that it happens faster.
I don't want to press this too much, but the fact that we're having 3 online meetings, the fact that we're having a subgroup on this, the fact that we're having CLC, that meets or exceeds planning requirements typically for a planning application, correct?
Absolutely exceeds the requirements, yes.
Last thing I just wanted to check with the, and I think staff just sent me a text about this, the site plan, all the studies that are required, my understanding is they will be made available online. And I think the date that I was given was March 26th. So someone was asking about a hydrological study or other engineering studies. My understanding is they will be made available online. And I think the date that I was given is March 26th. So for people who are very, very much into that, that will be made available to you then. Okay, let's go ahead. I think we have another question here. I think we're talking now to Aaron. Aaron, if you could open up your mic and go ahead. You've got a question or a comment.
Hey there, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, to Mayor John Tory, The notion that this won't affect safety and housing, house prices in our beautiful family neighborhood is a story for children. You say there's no evidence over and over again, but you really just have to use some common sense. For Brad Bradford, it's my opinion that your job is not to notify us of speed bumps that come in our area, but to oppose things that are bad for the community. So two-part question, because this is clearly bad for our community, Brad, what have you done to oppose this? Number two, what will you do to prevent the inevitable camping tents that will form in the giant beautiful park nearby by people that are associated with these new residents? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for those comments. Councillor Bradford, I don't know if you want to summarize or wait until the end, but obviously
No,
this
I
question was
will.
posed.
I will.
Yeah, go ahead.
And just in the effort of time and making sure we have time for people to ask questions, I will hold comments to the end. But it is also part of my job to notify you about speed humps. A lot of your neighbors want them. That's why you're getting the polling on your street. The disconnect between encampments in parks and what we are trying to do to address that, i.e. giving people the dignity of housing, is remarkable. So we're doing this precisely because we have encampments in parks. And I do support supportive housing. And I know that this is a tough conversation in the community. I know that's what we're doing right now. I know that we're going to work through that. But I'm not going to stigmatize those residents. I'm going to work with you. I'm going to work with the community to address the concerns. That's my job. That's what I'm doing. But you know, it's precisely because we have people in parks. It's precisely because we have people dying on streets that we need to stop building shelters and start building housing. So those are my comments.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I have one here from online from Annette. Actually, she had a couple of questions here. Can we give an example? Are there any of these successful projects across the street from an elementary school, daycare, public pool, community center, and so on? That obviously is clear. She's asking, is there anything like this across the street from a successful across from a hub for children? And the second question is, can you, would it be possible to share the 50 sites that were considered and why each of them, but the data on why they were or were not appropriate? I just, and I'm happy to go to the panel on this. For question two, essentially you're asking for kind of working documents that staff would have used in their process, and I'm going to go to Michael Wheel on Create TO just in terms of how they manage that process. And the question about, and this really looks like the Dovercourt Harrison site, are there any successful projects across the street from an elementary school, daycare? There's no public pool, but it is definitely a family-oriented, same kind of neighborhood. Let's go to Michael Whelan first. Annette would like to know, what are the other 50 sites? So how can you answer that?
Well, Bruce, I mean, I don't have the list in front of me, but suffice it to say that, you know, we're looking at doing 1,000 units across the city. And so some of the sites can meet the requested timelines that we've been asked to address in the immediate term last year as well as this year. We do have a list of criteria that we've looked at in order to determine whether specific sites can meet those criteria and meet the timelines. And of course, we're also developing a 5-year work plan so that some of these sites that may require environmental remediation on them and a record of site condition, which typically takes 2 years, we'll start that process going forward. And yeah, I think we can make the sites available that we've looked at and probably post those on the website in the future. But suffice it to say, you know, there's been an exceptional amount of work that's been undertaken by the entire team that's involved with modular housing, not just Creatio or CREM or Housing Secretariat. We get everybody involved. The process, as I said, just in terms of determining one site is anywhere from 40 to 60 days. Sometimes we undertake due diligence on sites and we ascertain that there may be a sewer underneath the site. There may not be, there could be some contamination. There could be other issues that basically disqualify the site at this point in time. But it is a thorough examination investigation that occurs in a very tight time frame.
Abby, before I go to you, I just want to ask Michael, My understanding is there are 17 sites, or probably more now, that of city surplus land that is being developed for housing, not just modular, but housing now and other sites across the city, parking lots beside TTC stations and all that. Yeah, there's a lot of sites that are being developed across the city, correct? Not just two. Michael, is that I know Create TO is involved in that as well.
Well, Bruce, yeah, there'll be quite a few. As I said, we're developing a working plan because we are looking at 1,000 units across the site or across the city over the next 5 years. And in addition to that, I think the 17 sites you're making reference to is affordable housing. So
right.
As Abby has referenced in the past, and maybe not tonight, there are several different housing programs within the city of Toronto. There's the Open Doors program, there's the affordable housing program, there's the modular housing program, and others, I'm sure. In the affordable housing program, we have 17 sites that we've identified where we're bringing 40,000 units to the city, of which a third would be affordable housing. This modular housing is 1,000 units, and so there's a lot of work that's happening and a lot of sites that are being considered right across the entire city for all of these required housing programs for the city.
Great, thank you very much.
You want to add to that, but
great,
it's a fairly significant and extremely important program that Abby and her team are leading with the help of the rest of us involved with each of those various programs.
Abby, do you want to just touch on this issue of, are there any of these successful ones? It could be here, or it could be something else where you've worked in other environments where you have a neighborhood that's good for families, good for this type of housing as well, a success story, or I know we've worked on one recently that is nestled into a neighborhood and very much not unlike this.
Yes, I mean there are lots of examples. As I said before, there's over 10,000 homes like this all across the city in many of our communities, and certainly it's our aim to really provide that affordable housing, affordable supportive housing in almost every community in our city, because we see the need everywhere. And so yes, there are many sites which have close proximity to schools and community centres and a full range of community services. Certainly the first two modular sites have many community services in the immediate vicinity of those buildings. And certainly many of the residents in those areas were also concerned at the time about community safety issues. I would say, again, there is a research evaluation done from BC on the large modular housing program that was undertaken by the province of BC, rolling out almost 2,000 homes, modular supportive housing homes. And they did I think it was on 10 sites, if I remember correctly, an in-depth evaluation which looked at a whole variety of characteristics. And many of those sites are very close to schools and other community services. So we need a full variety of housing in all of our communities. We need supportive housing for homeless adults and youth. We need family affordable housing. We need a full variety. There are many people in the city who are struggling with housing issues, and so it's important that we provide space and a full spectrum of affordable housing in all communities, and that's certainly our aim. That's the way our housing TO plan is structured. And as Michael referenced, we have these 17 Housing Now sites that Create TO is rolling out, again, all the way across the city and in many communities. And we'll continue. There'll be more sites, more supportive housing sites being announced over the next weeks and months, and people will be able to see. We'll put a map on the website, and people will be able to see the locations of those are in many of our communities.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's see. Here we've got Scott. Scott, I'm going to open up your mic. Go ahead if you have a question or a comment.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I just want to say that I'm not opposed to this. I want to be clear. I think that your hearts are in the right place, and I know that you're all just trying to do good work. I do have some experience with a liaison committee, and I know that you may not want to hear this, but it wasn't a very positive experience. In fact, it was so bad that a neighbor who is a judge with deep roots in the NDP party left the liaison committee because he said it was completely useless and unfair. So I guess as a test of whether or not, you know, the liaison committee is actually going to be open and transparent with the community so that you can achieve positive outcomes, because I think everybody wants to achieve positive outcomes. I'm wondering if you can just, you know, share with the audience some facts that should help assist you in a scientific approach to positive outcomes. And they would be things like, tell the community what percentage of the units, of the 64 units, are going to be males versus females. Tell them what percentage have criminal records. Tell them what percentage have drug addiction issues. Tell them what percentage have mental health challenges. Tell them what percentage of them actually come from the community, because I heard a lot about that last week. If you can share those facts with the committee and the audience tonight in an honest and transparent way to achieve positive scientific outcomes, maybe my experience with the liaison committee, you know, can be disregarded. But I'd like to hear the you know, the science and the data in an honest and transparent way.
So Abby, I'm happy to jump in, or you might want to lead off, and I'm happy to just to speak about how CLCs work, because I've done a couple of them. But I just want to be clear, Scott, are you talking about yourself, or are you talking about another person who has reported to you about this?
No, I'm talking about myself.
Okay, great. I just wanted to be really clear about that. So Abby, do you want to start off, and then I'm happy to jump in?
Well, I appreciate the question around how do we know that we're going to be successful, right? I think that's one of the things that's underlying your question. And certainly the Community Liaison Committee is a big part of that. I think the challenge for us is we have to walk a line around transparency, but also privacy for the individuals. We wouldn't be in a situation of sharing that kind of information about a regular rental building, for example. You don't get to find out whether the neighbor that moves in next to you has a criminal record. So I think we can speak generally, and we can look to provide some more information about the characteristics of people who experience homelessness in our city. But we do have to respect people's individual privacy, whilst at the same time encouraging that dialogue with residents. So I know from experience that there is some information that can be shared, certainly usually issues around gender, for example, some characteristics, but we take our lead from the nonprofit operators about what's appropriate to share in terms of, you know, physical health or other characteristics. And so that may have been some of your experience on a previous community liaison committee, I'm not sure, but I'll let Bruce speak to the process, and we're happy to take that feedback and look and see how, again, like I said, how we can create sufficient transparency for the community whilst at the same level respecting the privacy of the individuals who will move into this building. So Bruce, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. And I know I'm moderating this, but I've also done many community liaison committees, so I'm happy to kind of give feedback in terms of how they operate. There are terms of reference that are prepared. So everyone who jumps in or who volunteers can see the terms and reference of the committee and what's kind of on the table and the kind of things that we're not able to address. This is not managing the housing. This is a dialogue. It's a place where people can come and listen and learn and give suggestions and feedback. It's public, so these meetings are not secretive. The minutes are posted. They people who get agendas in advance. Sometimes, not every meeting, they'll actually have a point on the agenda where members of the public can come and speak and bring concerns. As a facilitator for these things, typically I would check with all of the members to see if there are items that they want to put on the agenda, and we'd let people know in advance, and we'd bring panelists to answer questions. So it's very much a back and forth. I find it changes before construction starts. A lot of it has to do with who are the tenants going to be, and they want to know what the process is going to be, and they want to know who the providers are going to be. And then as construction starts, a lot of it tends to be more about construction management and mitigating any neighborhood issues around construction. And then as you get closer to opening, then again it turns more about how the operators are going to liaise with the neighborhood. What if there are issues? How could we help? So I find the community liaison committee will adapt as you get closer and closer to opening. It's a very genuine, healthy thing. It's not monolithic. People have different views. It's really can be healthy. When you get neighbors together to talk about something this important, it can be really, really valuable and healthy. So please don't be discouraged. I think it would be healthy for you to join. If you're not happy, you don't have to stick with it. But we obviously want to make it work. We want it to be healthy for the neighbors and for the tenants who are there. And I just want to support Abby's comment about there's a balancing act between privacy issues and supporting people who sometimes are vulnerable, and also people's right to know. Really good question. Let's go to Glenn. I have Glenn next. Go ahead, Glenn. Glenn, I have you. Your mic is open. Go ahead. All right, next I'm going to go to Joe. Joe, you are next in line. Go ahead. Joe, go ahead.
Okay. Hey, Bruce, we did meet.
Yeah.
My kids were the ones throwing the snow. I keep saying I want to keep it short, but there's so many questions. Questions, I'll shoot them out. They should be quick. So the MZO is for the zoning order change, and it's currently zoned as residential. What will it change to?
Let's pause. Let's do these really quickly. That's a question. If you're zoning it, you're not changing the zoning. My understanding, we can ask the planners, you're changing some of the planning standards, the zoning standards. Sharon Hill, can you answer that quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right, Bruce. We are changing the zoning standards to reflect exactly what the proposal is on the site, setback from the street, how many units, how many stories, things of that nature.
Great, Joe.
Potential.
Pardon me?
Correct.
Okay.
Next question, Joe. Go ahead.
There are 3 levels of government funding. At some point, governments may stop funding. What happens?
So there's 2 pieces. Let's go to Abby on this. There's the capital cost, which is federal and municipal. And then there's also the question of support or ongoing services, which is some combination. But Abby, do you want to touch on the issue of the funding and what happens if the funding dries up? And then I'm going to go back to Joe with another question in a second. Go ahead, Abby.
Yeah, so Bruce, you're right. So the capital funding, so the cost to build this building and construct the modules is covered by both the city and also the federal government. So there will be sufficient revenue from the rents for the nonprofit to look after the building. And we're requesting provincial funding for the supportive housing dollars. Now, there is, as I said, around 10,000 supportive housing units across the city right now, and there is a robust process that the province has to fund many of those, some directly as housing and some through, health dollars as well. And so it's really about the operator who are able to demonstrate good service and good value over a long period of time with good outcomes. And if at any point in the future we were not able to maintain or secure funding, then we would reevaluate the program in this building and make a change in order for this building to continue to be successful. So we're not anticipating that. We see a fair degree of stability in the housing, supportive housing sector, but perhaps not enough of it. We would like to grow that sector and increase the funding, which is why we're requesting additional funding from the province. But we do see a degree of stability that they continue to fund buildings over the long period of time.
Okay, Joe, one more question and then I'm going to move on. What's your next one? And then we'll add you to the bottom of the queue. Go ahead.
Yeah, last one's a little bit longer because I know we talk about the Roehampton Hotel and it's used as an example. And in a lot of the responses, the first thing I hear is the Roehampton, the sheltering that we're creating now, the modular has doors. In my experience staying in a hotel, there is a door. I do have a door. You do have privacy. You have a bathroom. So I'm confused at how that is. The biggest difference is that you tell me Roehampton doesn't have any support where this one will, which begs the question, why are you not providing support at the Roehampton when you have facilities in place that could easily add everything? And if you compare the modular to the Roehampton, it really has everything. It's got a kitchenette. It's got rooms that you could either divvy up to have one-on-one consultation, then you can have 24/7 support. I just don't understand why the city hasn't started that process or it does that process in conjunction. I'm not saying this site should be not looked at, but I'm confused as to how these discussions seem to not bring that question up.
Okay, Joe, we really appreciate you raising this. The Roehampton isn't officially on the agenda tonight, and these are apples and oranges, right? So the Roehampton is a different type of service and a shelter-based hotel. So we don't have all of the folks on the panel tonight who can speak to specifics. The city has probably 100 shelters across the city, as you probably know. This is a different type of support and a different type of housing. So we don't, it's it doesn't really work to take Roehampton as an example and transpose it onto this site. This is not, it's like completely apples and oranges. And we could plug you into someone who maybe has answers about how to make our city shelters, better. There's a different situation there. I'm not sure if it's really helpful for this panel to focus on the Roehampton situation. Can I move on to the next question? Is that okay to do that?
Yeah, I'm not going to argue. I mean, the only reason I understand it's apples and oranges in that type, but it's also the facility. The hotel itself seems to have similar structures to what you're discussing.
Oh, I see. They are private rooms. They are private
Yes.
rooms, but it's a different security. This is tenure. This is your permanent resident. I'm not trying to go back and forth and answer your question. These are permanent tenants with their own kitchenettes and their own support. So that's a little different than living in a hotel room. So let's go to, thank you very much for that. I have someone who tried to get in last week, Marnie. I think you tried to get in with a question last week. We weren't able to accommodate you. So let's open your mic, and Marnie, you go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Actually, I wasn't here last week, and surprisingly, there are more Marnies than I would think at my age. But anyway, I'm happy to be here and share my question, because I'm neither supporting or not supporting, but I wanted to speak to the data that Abby had mentioned about the Reederman residents in BC. And according to the Reederman residents in BC and the outcomes after 6 months of the modular housing project that was out there, some of the main challenges were accessing groceries and community services. Where we sit in this and where this location is going to be, there is no local low-cost grocery store, nor are there easily accessible community services. Unfortunately, even though Stanwaddle does not even have doesn't have the same kinds of supports to the community services, they kind of facilitate more for senior citizens, for very young children, and they don't have the facilities. Like, they have a summer swimming pool and they have an ice skating rink, things that people don't normally. You'd have to have the ability to do these things in order to use them. My question is, how will you address the biggest challenge of food insecurity? Shoppers Drug Mart is not a means of support for local community shopping. And when the grocery stores are a 20 to 30-minute walk away, and at best, they're some of the most luxurious grocery stores in the city. So how can we address the food insecurity issue?
Okay, thank you very much. And I just apologize. After Marnie, I'm going to go to Monica, because it was Monica who wanted to speak, didn't get to speak last week. So that was my mistake. Abby, over to you. How do we provide food security or support?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for raising the issue of food security, because it is a really important one. There are many ways that we can address food security. So the nonprofit housing provider can do things like, and I've seen this done in other residences, where they'll arrange a weekly delivery or a weekly visit with transportation to a suitable supermarket or shopping or market to get food. There were also volunteer programs who were helping bring food, or either bring food to the building, and also helping or supporting residents to go shopping with themselves, having accompanied visit. So there's a variety of things. The other important thing is that there will be a communal kitchen in this building, and so therefore a food program that will be offered on site as well. So residents will be encouraged to both kind of shop and cook for themselves individually, but also they'll be able to partake in you know, getting their meals from the kitchen and eating communally if that's what they want to do. So there will be a variety of things that will be done to promote food security, and we'd be very interested to work with follow up with residents who are interested in this particular topic, and talk about their suggestions for what we do to make food security a priority for this building.
Thank you very much for that. So next I'm going to go to Monica. I think we have time for maybe 3 more questions, and then we're going to do some wrap up, which means that there'll be a few folks who don't get through tonight. But we apologize, and we will put up a slide in terms of how you can give us your feedback and information. Monica tried to get in last week, was not able to. Monica, go ahead with your question or comment.
Hi, my name's Monica. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that I'm talking. Thank you so much. Thank you, Brad, and thank you, Mayor Tory, for being very supportive of the marginalized populations that it seems have been attacked tonight by some of the people. My mom's on this meeting in another house, obviously, and my brother's on this meeting. We're all really supportive of this project. We have our own questions, but my mom texted me hers, and I really want everybody to hear it. I really support this project. I remember moving to East York and people threw eggs at our house. I don't want our new neighbors to feel like how we felt when we moved here 23 years ago. The least we can do is welcome them and help. How can we make them feel welcome? That's my question. I have another one too, but I'm sure this one should suffice.
Okay, so that wasn't rhetorical. That was a real question. How do we help people feel welcome to the neighborhood? Abby, do you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, well, you know, I guess asking the question is a good place to start, right? Because I think if you have that, you know, desire to welcome new residents into your community, then you'll be able to do that. So we've seen communities of residents come together with a huge array of different ideas. So it's things like welcome packs. Getting, as people move into their new apartment, making sure that they've got, you know, bed linen and towels and toothbrush and kind of, you know, hygiene pack, things like that, that they may not have had before. There's like access to clothing as well, which is really important. So there's a whole variety of things, and we would.
They're all. Yeah.
Sorry, I can hear someone talking. And then the other thing is what we would have seen, and maybe this is something we can come back to in a kind of post-COVID world, is, you know, actual meetings with residents. They're holding a barbecue or a community event where people get to hang out together and talk as equals and as communities, as part of the same community. So there are lots of things that can be done, and we look forward to working with community and residents here to come up with, you know, unique ideas for you, this building, and your community.
Thank you so much, Abby. Can I just ask one more quick question? That was so insightful, and I'll make sure to be involved with that. Will there be education campaigns to tackle misinformation about crime increase and stereotypes about homeless people? I'm concerned that my current neighbors have incorrect information. I want to make sure our new neighbors feel welcome and safe from misinformed biases that would lead to over-policing in the future.
So I will just maybe briefly say in response to that question, and certainly Councillor Bradford at the beginning identified that there are likely things that we can do a better job on in the future. And this is certainly an area that we can do a better job on, is providing information, both in terms of, you know, research or evaluation studies, but also to the stories of individuals who kind of both live and work in buildings like this. So we can ensure that people have access to the kinds of information, both kind of statistically, but also from a narrative perspective, that they can see themselves in those stories and that they can get a better understanding of what it's really like to be homeless, and what the difference is when you're able to move into supportive housing. So that's something that we're working on as a staff team, and hope to be able to improve on in the future. So thank you.
Okay, I had someone on the list earlier. I called on them and I couldn't connect, and that's Imogen. So I'm wondering if I could open up your microphone. Imogen, if you could, your mic is now open. If you have a comment or if you have a question, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, Monica beautifully said, by the way. Love that. I just wanted to speak on the stigma here, because people are like kind of scared of having people with mental illness or addiction moving in. But like, I am an ex-addict and I am mentally ill and I live in the area, but I'm not homeless. So people don't have that stigma. And I didn't terrorize the neighborhood. I wasn't, you know, like a scary person. I was struggling. And I think that I just wanted to make sure that people who are still struggling with addiction, that they'll be granted access to housing here, because I know it's going to help them. I know this is going to be good for them and they need it. And I just wanted to make sure that they're still allowed to, like, addicts and mentally ill people are going to be welcome into this housing unit.
Thank you very much for that, Imogen. That's an incredibly important question. Thank you. And it's really important that you spoke up tonight with your own personal story. Abby, can you just speak to this question of folks coming to this housing from where they are, and the fact that getting folks settled in housing is really an important part of their healthy recovery or their healthy living? Abby, can you just speak to that?
Yes, I can. And thanks, Imogen, for the courage that you've shown in kind of sharing your own story. It's definitely intimidating to do that. And so thank you for doing that. In terms of barriers to housing, one of the main focuses of this kind of housing program is to break down barriers and to make sure that people are able to address pre-existing health conditions, mental health issues, substance use issues, cancer, all kinds of health issues that are likely going unaddressed because they're currently homeless. And it's difficult to put together a robust healthcare plan for yourself when you don't have a home to stay in and you don't have an address where someone can write to with your, you know, or call you with your appointments and things like that. So I think having a home is a great first step into supporting people to gain access to the healthcare system and see improvements in their health and well-being. And certainly health improvements are a substantial part. When you look at the evaluation, the improvements that people see after about 6 months of living in supportive housing is remarkable, and that they're really able to see great improvements. Now, not always for everybody. Sometimes the pre-existing condition is too serious. So sometimes, for example, the move into supportive housing ends up being, you know, a palliative care step where they are able to spend their last days, perhaps as a result of, you know, untreated cancer or something. So there is a range of issues, but I think providing this kind of housing is a very foundational step that enables people to make different choices and access the kind of healthcare that they may not be able to access right now because they're living in shelters or living outside. So thank you.
Oh, you guys are the best.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So, folks, we have about 300 people on the call, and we have about 30 more with their hands up. Unfortunately, we've gone past our 9 o'clock. So my suggestion is that let's put up this slide. If you would like to get involved, you can just see from here in terms of how we can follow up. If you have a question, you can write to communityliaison@lura.ca. So all of these questions come in and then they're processed and then they're kind of answered generically and posted to the website. If you would like to be involved with the Community Liaison Committee, if you write to that address and you just put CLC in the subject line, then you can be invited and you'll be participating in that committee. There's a small process, but it's really, really easy to get involved. If you're very interested in the parking issue, you can write to that email address, communityliaison@lura.ca, and just put parking in the subject line. Or if you're interested in community safety and being involved in the walkabout, then you can also do that and just put community safety in the subject line. We also have a meeting coming up next week with members of the school community, parents, and care providers who are involved with the school community. And we are trying to organize a committee or a little online meeting with sports conveners and organizers so that they can find out how this impacts the facilities in the area. I'm just going to ask thank everyone for their questions, but I wanted to turn things over to Councillor Bradford, and I know you've been making notes and following tonight closely, and you've been following this since the beginning, and I'm just wondering if you just want to provide closing comments. Councillor Bradford?
Yeah, thanks very much, Bruce, and thanks everyone for being on the line tonight. I think we topped out around 350 participants, and when we had 400 last week, I wasn't sure what the numbers were going to be like this soon, a week later. So 350 participants is fantastic, and I think it shows how engaged our community is. I'd also like to thank our Mayor, John Tory, again, who was here at the top of the call and has been answering questions in the chat all night. He's very plugged in and engaged, and grateful for him being here. City staff and consultants who have responded to my ask to kind of get this back on the rails here, and I think we're making progress. As I said at the beginning, my main goal here with you tonight is to listen. I have been taking a ton of notes here. My table's a bit of a mess. I stick them on the monitor as we're working, but Linda, Cicely, Monica, Scott, Gordon, Brent, Marnie, Dan, Jeff, Imogen, I really do appreciate those comments and questions. I've been reading the chat, I've been looking at the Q&A, and there are consistent themes about what's coming up, consistent concerns. We also heard consistent voices of support, and I see that in the chat too, and I hear that. And I know that there's a wide range of views on this project. But just to be very clear with folks, this is going to be a supportive housing site. It's moving forward. This is going to be a modular project. And I understand that some folks are nervous, some folks are concerned, some people are angry and upset about that. It's not going to be easy. But we do need to come together to make that work. And I think we're putting in a couple tools in place where there's going to be opportunities to channel that input and that energy, provide that input into the process so that we can get a better outcome for everybody. We don't have every answer to every question yet. And, I read the comments and folks, there is a criticism about a lack of detail, a lack of specifics. And I hear that and I see that. I want those answers too, but I think we don't have every answer yet because we haven't gotten there. That means we have an opportunity to shape the project as a community. And there's a number of things that I've been working on already. As Bruce mentioned, that we have a great relationship with Superintendent Strobel at 55, and we're going to do a community safety walk, safety audit to identify and address some of those concerns that people have been voicing here tonight and in the weeks prior. We're also going to have 3 smaller working groups, one to work with the schools, the folks at Canadian Martyrs. I met with them, the parent council last night. They were fantastic. We chatted for an hour, and I'll be meeting with Parkside next week, and we're going to set up a community school group to discuss concerns and issues. We have our trustee, Michelle Arts, and her team on the line tonight. She's been texting with me. She's been supportive and fantastic, as has our Catholic School Board trustee, Angela Kennedy, both fantastic partners here. We're going to be working with the sports organizations and stakeholders of the park. And as Bruce has said, we're going to have one specifically to deal with that parking piece. The applications for the CLC are going up now. So a lot of folks have expressed interest in that in the weeks prior and on the call tonight. So, I'm looking forward to working with you. I've been out to modular sites in other communities, and both Macy, Harrison, and as soon as we can get back there after COVID, I'm going to do a visit with staff and residents around the phase 1 projects. I've spoken to those councillors, Deputy Mayor Anna Bilau, Councillor Gary Crawford, just on the other side of Vic Park. And, you know, they had a similar experience, a challenging experience with a lot of questions, a lot of concerns, but the community came together. They rose to that moment. They worked through those concerns together. And over several months, not weeks, several months, they got there. There's a lot of important pieces on this site in particular that we need to get sorted out. And again, we're at the beginning of the process. This would have been the very first meeting that we were going to have on this. So, you know, the CLC, which I requested through my motion at council last week, that's starting now. That application is going to be open. The parking piece, we're working with Parkside and DA Morrison to address that. Again, our trustee is on the line. We also have lots of work to do on the on-street side. And as was requested last week, we need to get that full and final parking study out to the public, posted so that you can review it, critique it, evaluate it. We got to do that. That's an effort to improve the transparency on the project. And we need to do a deep dive on the family units question. You know, I have it in my notes here. I've had it in my calls or discussions. I think there's merit to exploring that. And, you know, that wasn't clearly, as we've heard from staff, that wasn't conceived in the initial conception of this project. As we've heard from staff, there is a, you know, percentage higher need for single units. But I think that there also, you know, there is still a need for families in the city as well. And this might be, you know, a site where we can explore that. So we are going to explore that. You know, I don't want to spend too much time on the piece about whether or not I should be opposing this application. There was a question that came in, and why am I not doing my job opposing this application? You know, my job is to advocate for the community, and it's all of the community, and that's what I'm doing here. And we will be doing this together through the consultation with everything that you've heard tonight, and everything that you'll hear in the future. That's why I'm listening. That's why I'm taking action at council. You know, the safety review, the parking analysis, the CLC, the subcommittee working groups, all of this stuff, and the commitment to continue exploring family units. That's listening, and that's us taking action together. It means looking out for folks who live here in their homes, folks who live in, you know, adjacent rental buildings, and folks who are living on the street or in their parks or have just lost their homes. And these sets of people are actually, you know, from my experience in this job talking to folks, those people are actually not that far apart. And some of us are a lot closer than you think. So, you know, I appreciate that for some people tonight, this was their first community meeting. Welcome. Welcome to the process. Welcome to being a part of this, and I thank you. If you haven't been involved before, you know, this is the way that we are listening and engaging right now in this the global pandemic that we're in. I think that we're going to continue to move towards a constructive place here in our community. I know we're going to rise and meet this moment. We're going to work together. And I really am grateful for the 350 folks who spent 2.5 hours of your night tonight with us to share that input. So I will leave it there. There's a lot more to say, but we have a lot more work to do, and I'm here to do that with you. Back over to you, Bruce. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bradford. Before I go to the mayor, because I know the mayor would like to say a few words. Before I do that, I owe someone an apology who, when I got disconnected earlier tonight, he got bumped off the list. So, Councillor and Mr. Mayor, if that's okay, I'd just like to go back, and I apologize for doing this. Derek, who had been in the queue, and inadvertently I dropped off. So I'm just wondering if we could just pause for a minute and go for a quick question or comment from Derek before we close the evening. Go ahead, Derek. Did you have, you wanted to jump in with a comment or question?
Thanks, Bruce, and thanks for correcting what happened earlier. I know it was a technological
I was looking for someone called David, and you're a Derek, so that's how I messed it up. So go ahead, Derek. It's open to you.
No problem. Thank you. You know, I am definitely supportive. I'm definitely one of the people that's supportive of housing our homeless, if that makes sense. However, I mean, the biggest challenge I have is with the process. Brad, you've mentioned this in your comments as far as, you know, the lack of information and the pace at which it's coming out. And for me, that's actually the biggest concern is just the lack of information. The information we've been getting is studies by either by bias groups or and things like that. And so I'm looking forward to reading those, and thank you, Abby, for answering that. My question is on the design of the building itself. Obviously, with the site plan being sent in on March 26th, there is and obviously these units starting to be constructed in the spring. How much time is there left? Brad mentioned one of my things is, and looking at the amenities around, that this should be this is a great spot for family housing. Or I guess multi-person dwellings is probably the right phrase. And how much time is actually left before that decision can be made, and how can I, as someone who lives 100 meters from this site, make sure that my voice is heard and that this process goes in the direction that I think is going to be the best outcome, both for the new people coming into our community and the local residents that are already here.
Okay, so there's several different levels on this question, but this proposal that is being brought forward is for singles. That is unambiguous. That's the proposal that has come forward. Sharon, the question, I guess, on a site plan and planning side, and then Abby, just in terms of how the project is being organized. Do you want to speak to that issue and how and when that decision has or will be made?
Sure. Thanks, Bruce. Sharon, I'll speak to the planning process side. Certainly in terms of the site plan process, one of the opportunities we have through the community meetings, and our architect consultants and our urban design and other city staff are on these calls last week and this week listening. So there is opportunity to provide that feedback through these community meetings, as well as through liaising with staff or your council. And then when the actual site plan application comes in, to review those plans as well. There will be a second cycle of review as well. So some of the things that we're hearing, we may be able to capture and reflect in the first submission, but there is that opportunity throughout and in the second submission as well. So I mean, you're right, we are moving quickly, but there's absolutely time, and this front-end consultation is helping with that.
Okay, thank you for that. And Abby, this proposal is for singles, and this has been funded as a housing for singles, so for individuals. This matter continues to be brought forward, obviously, by members of the community who are resisting the idea, or some are resisting the idea of singles versus families. And how and when can that be brought through the process?
So briefly, because I think we did touch on this a little bit earlier. So the program that we put forward, or the program we put forward, if you like, to CMHC for federal funding, was very much a focus on homeless singles, because they're almost 90% of the people who experience chronic homelessness in our city, and that was very much our target group. And it's on that basis that we did get funding for these projects, but we're hearing, and we've heard on other sites as well, the desire to see family housing, and so that's feedback that we're taking, and we'll be continuing that discussion with the councillor and his office. So I don't have an answer in terms of what we're able to do about that today, but just to know that the focus on singles was driven by our kind of data, if you like, around who is homeless in our city and where our most urgent kind of pressures are. And also that was backed up through the funding that we have received.
Great, thank you very much. And with that, I'm just going to call on our mayor, John Tory, who's been listening in and was participating last week, and who has also participated in many of these other modular housing discussions across the city. I know you were in Willowdale last week, and you've done other modular housing and other housing. Mr. Mayor, would you like to make some closing comments?
Well, just to say, Bruce, thank you to you for conducting the meeting. And, I know people who always ask about whether you stacked up the questions or not. I think based on the variety of opinions we heard tonight, including many in opposition to this, that you, as usual, did a very fair job of letting lots of people have their say. And I was watching the chat session very carefully and trying to answer as many of the questions as I could, as were others. And so I think certainly people of all points of view had their points of view both heard and listened to by people like ourselves that have been here from city staff and from the city council. And I want to thank Brad Bradford. As I said at the outset, he calls me. It isn't. I wouldn't. Hourly would be an exaggeration, but daily is not, and multiple daily would also not be an exaggeration on this. And you know, I just appreciate the constructive way in which he's going about this. You know, one of the comments that just appeared on the chat, and not all of you will necessarily have seen it, but I saw it from a gentleman who just said, you know, the dialogue that starts to get on all sides of people saying, well, those who are concerned about this aren't compassionate. And then on the other hand, there are those who are, you know, opposed to this, who start, you know, chastising the people who are the ones that we're trying to help. I come at this from a different perspective, in that I have a job that, you know, that my responsibility is to represent all 3 million people who live here. And that's difficult because they're people from all different walks of life, all different points of view, you name it. But I feel a particular responsibility, as I have through COVID, to make sure that we take account of the needs of those who are the most vulnerable. And as I said earlier on, I mean, the people who this housing is meant for, they actually are not, contrary to what has been said by some of those who participated tonight, they are not criminals. And they are not bad people. They're homeless. They're homeless. And they became homeless through a variety of circumstances. And those of you who've talked to homeless people before will know they become homeless because they lose their job, because they lose their family, because they get depressed and develop a mental illness issue, and so forth and so on. And you know, the other thing I've seen, because I've gone right across the city to meetings like this, and by the way, they always start off about the same, with people legitimately having concerns about their neighborhood and what's this going to be, and it's changed and it's different, and some of the details aren't available. And in the end, every single one of these supportive housing, permanent homes with supports, every one ends up a successful integrated development or project into the neighborhood. And the neighbors reach out. One of the earlier chat people said, well, how can I reach out to become involved? And I wrote them back and said about the community liaison committee and so on. But I said, you know, it's interesting, because a great deal of the time the residents will reach out, and the people who are the operators and so on, but the neighbors reach out coming back the other way. And that's why this works. In the end, it works, because Torontonians are people who understand that they have to care about each other, and that these are people who are trying to get back on their feet, and this will help them to do that. And the last point I'll make, Bruce, is one that I think bears repeating over and over again. You know, and I know there will be people on here who will be upset with me for supporting this kind of development, and we're supporting them in many, many places, by the way, across the city. And that's why I go to so many of these meetings. We could not keep on doing this the old way. The old way was to put people into shelters. It was to put them into shelters where, frankly, they had no supports. So the notion that they were going to turn their lives around in any way was just not likely to happen. The shelters, you know, turned out to be a real problem for us when something like COVID happened, in terms of physical distancing of any kind. They're just not the place that we're going to allow these people to get back on their feet. And that's what we all want. And this is the different way of doing it, that actually has a home for people with supports. It is actually cheaper than a shelter. Not that it's about money, but if you're concerned about that, as I have to be and you have to be, it's cheaper, and it's more effective, and it's more humane, and it's more sensible. And the smaller of these developments with 35, 40, 45, 50 units work better, because you're not getting great big congregations. You lose that intimacy of support when you get into these great big huge developments. So I thank the residents very much for their views, including those who spoke up very negatively about this tonight, because it helps us to sort of, you know, take account of what the different issues are. And I'm very gratified by the fact that Bruce has said tonight they're going to have the walkabout with police officers and others present to discuss whatever safety concerns people have. They're going to share the parking consultant studies with you, rather than just sharing them with us, so that you can look at them and say, well, that makes sense, that doesn't, I live here, I know. And I just think that's the right way to go about this. And I really urge you to think about signing up for the Community Liaison Committee, because notwithstanding the one person who said that they weren't useful, they have worked every time. And people take an interest in them, and they work, and things that people say at that committee are taken into account. So I thank you very much again for coming. It is remarkable, as Brad said, that hundreds of people would come out to meetings in a row, and there'll be more meetings. And I hope hundreds of people come out then too. And I will look forward to seeing you when I come with Brad to the neighborhood to walk around. And it's to look and to see and to learn, but to listen, most importantly. And we'll be there to listen to you directly in person, masks on, pretty soon, I think. Thank you very much, Bruce.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. We're just going to put up that slide so that people can get in touch with us. And with that, we're going to bring tonight's meeting to a close. Reminder that we're doing another session like this on May 3rd. So by then, we will have had feedback from these various other subgroups and the walkabout and so on, and the parking assessment. You can also send your comments or questions. You can see it up on the screen, communityliaison@lura.ca. You can visit the website, which is toronto.ca/modular housing. And while you're there, you can fill out the form, the comment form, but you can also join the listserv. So you can put your email address in, and then we can update you as information becomes available. Let me thank everyone for attending tonight's session, and thank you to our panelists, Abby and Michael and Sharon, and all of the other resource people who are behind the scenes to make this happen. Thank you to Councillor Bradford and to Mayor Tory, and to my technical co-host, Mercedes Madani, and to the folks at Lure Consulting who've been working behind the scenes to make this work. And Liz, thank you very much for jumping in when I dropped off the call tonight, but thank you for being there.
No
Thanks,
problem.
everyone. Have a good
Thank
night,
you.
everyone. All right. Thank you.